I've been wanting to talk about this for a little while now. In fact, I've been putting it off for a little bit because I just kind of had a lot to go through in terms of video topics. This should have been higher on my priorities list, and I'm happy to say that the company that is Sega has a union known as the Allied Employees Guild Improving Sega, also known as AEGIS. And honestly, I welcome it, especially as a fan of Sega myself. I love the Sega Dreamcast. I'm a die-hard Sonic fan. And what's cool is that we're talking over 200 employees are involved in this union. This is a multi-department union too, which is not only the first multi-department union in the United States, but it's also the largest video game developer union in the United States. Wow. This is a quote from Angel Gomez from AEGIS, who is a translator for Sega. "We are overjoyed to celebrate our union election win as members of AEGIS CWA. Now, through our union, we'll be able to protect the parts of our job we love and strengthen the benefits, pay, and job stability available for all workers." Now keep in mind, this is a multi-department union. There are two departments to be aware of. There's the one in Burbank, California, and then there's the one in Irvine, California. Sega employees, especially of Sega of America, are more likely to have a stake into negotiations for better working conditions and possibly even higher wages. Sega is by no means a perfect corporation, as there will never be such a thing as a perfect corporation. But this greatly contrasts with Nintendo, who I never liked, ever. Like, yeah, I like Pokemon, but oh my god, Mario just reminds me of Sesame Street. But yeah, in general, I do have somewhat of a bias against Nintendo and in favor of Sega, but that doesn't mean that Nintendo is safe from scrutiny. They recently prosecuted a hacker who was actually burning and selling their video games, and they charged this gentleman $14.5 million. By the way, his name is Gary Bowser. Not that Bowser, an actual person named Gary Bowser. They sued Bowser for $14.5 million. That's the rest of his life. Not to mention that Nintendo regularly cease and desist the projects of their own fans, including ROM hacks. Sega does what Nintendo don't. More like Sega doesn't do the stupid shit that Nintendo would pull, although that's not as catchy. This is good because the people who are making some of our favorite video games of all time are in fact having a better say as to what goes on in the corporation of Sega. And I mean, I just think that if you are working on a video game series that is thematically anti-authoritarian like Sonic the Hedgehog, I do think that you should at least practice what you preach. And granted, this is definitely a product of co-opting rebellious and anti-authoritarian aesthetics for corporate consumption, as I've talked about in a previous video. But it's important that the workers who are making our favorite video games do in fact get paid a living wage. Among other workers, Sega workers and Sega employees are not the only ones who are striking right now. Starbucks workers, Amazon workers, the writers' strikes that is going on right now as I'm recording this. But there is some things I want to bring up in terms of the perspective of some other people who are hearing about this news. I want to dispel some myths. Sega of Japan might shut down Sega of America and open a subsidiary in Japan that will specifically be a United States public relations unit. That's very possible. You also got to remember that the United States, especially with Sega of America, is way too damn important for the overall Sega brand. After all, Sega of America took part in developing some of Sega's most memorable titles. Need I mention Sonic the Hedgehog 2? And for a lot of people, Sonic 2, which came out on the Sega Genesis, is one of their favorite games of all time. So the labor force in the United States is very important, but that doesn't mean that Sega of Japan shouldn't be unionized. It absolutely should. I think Sega of Japan should absolutely unionize, even if the anti-union laws and anti-union measures are a lot more strict in Japan. But overall, I just don't think that Sega of Japan is going to kill off Sega of America like how Walmart would kill off one of its own branches in a rural city that happens to have too much worker solidarity. Not to mention, the whole reason why Sega of America is able to unionize as vastly as it is able to is because of the hard work that working class people have put in their dues for the past couple of decades. This kind of victory here is absolutely not an isolated incident, because there are in fact other video game developer unions such as Raven Software, Blizzard Albany, ZeniMac, and Tender Claws. And now we're starting to see a consistent trend of the normalization of video game developers being unionized. And I wish to see that more with not just video game developers and story writers for TV shows, but also with animators. I could definitely say that Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network are very much due for the same treatment.
Oh, look! A toy that was already broken. Unfortunately, the union forbids me from picking it up.
That right there is a far too often disingenuous anti-union talking point that is often employed by employers and corporations to get their workers to not unionize.
Let's say you're working in stationery, but you're walking through domestics on your way to check on something. A guest stops you and asks for help. What would you do? Without even thinking about it, you'd stop and give them any assistance they required. But what if union work rules say you can't work outside of your department? What do you tell the guest? Sorry, I can't help you? That makes you look bad, but more importantly, it means our guest doesn't get immediate attention.
That right there is an incredibly distorted misrepresentation of what unions are and what they do. Be wary of corporations who use this rhetoric that the customer or consumer will suffer as a result of unions organizing in their workplace. Because the Los Angeles Teachers Union's victory from earlier this year indicates that that is not true. It is incredibly emotionally manipulative, and it really says something about how corporations view their own workers. Just to wrap this up, is some person is probably going to say,
so again, a lot of you could say whatever you want. You know, you're saying this is great, this is bad, I don't know. All I know is the problem with unionizing is whenever there is a contract dispute, that means you're going to have a shortage, basically, a work stoppage in a way. And for the gaming industry, it's not like you can just hire anybody to do that specific role. Remember, you're going to get programmers, illustrators, storytellers, etc. You know, it's not like if you're working for a delivery company and if there's a work stoppage, you could just get replacement drivers just like that. I mean, how hard is it? All you got to do is deliver packages or do this, do that. How hard is it? I could hire somebody off the street and they'll do it for what I'm paying them until a new deal is finalized. You see it all the time with all these with unions, this and that. There's always a strike. More so than recent, actually. Every time you hear about a strike, it's been happening. So I'm hoping this is not going to backfire on Sega's behalf, because again, that's one of the negatives about unionizing is you get people joining the picket line.
Whose side are you on, buddy? If there is a holdup when it comes to the development of your next favorite Sonic game or whatever, that's on Sega, the corporation itself, not on the workers. With all due respect, but I think it's a very privileged position to look at the workers who are trying to demand better working conditions and to turn around and say, well, I'm worried that there's going to be a work stoppage. In a way, it reminds me of the same people who get mad at a drive-thru at McDonald's or Starbucks, harassing the worker because they got an order wrong or they took too long. Sega and Sonic fans alike are extremely opinionated about this franchise and company, and myself included, but I think we need to remember that there are human lives that are keeping up this entire corporate machine. And another thing to remember is that when workers strike, the way things get done quicker is when the management of Sega of America listens to the demands of the workers that it employs and adheres to their demands. Because they're the ones with all that crunch time, not you. You get to play Sakura Wars or Yakuza or fucking Shenmue. You get to go on YouTube.com and bitch about how there's no Sonic Adventure 3. I know I'm speaking to people on the internet, which is never the best thing to do in a moment like this, but I'm just urging people to have a little bit of compassion and empathy for the workers of Sega. Sega has the capital to be able to say yes or no to something, and the fact that the workers are unionizing is to give the workers some kind of negotiation power when it comes to their own benefits as working people under their subsidiary. As Sega fans, we know for a fact that in the past, Sega, whenever they release a game that is rushed, it is bad. Need I mention Sonic 06, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, how shitty they became because of the fact that they were rushed. And I know some person out there is gonna be like, oh well, I like these. That's not even the point. I'm glad you like those games. That's not what I'm trying to say. No matter how you subjectively feel about it, objectively speaking, they are very broken games. You can even say my favorite game is very broken. Oh my fucking god. Yeah, this is hard. This is, oh my god. But the difference between Sonic Adventure and Sonic 06, Sonic Adventure had a lot of love and care put into it. The limitations of Sonic Adventure was purely the hardware and software being used. They were treading new territory that they weren't before. Sonic 06 definitely had some, cut corners. The employees deal with so much crunch time when it comes to developing these games that it does end up resulting in a fucking mess, like Sonic Colors Ultimate. Because Sega just wants to ship out shit in certain deadlines every 5-year anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever, they end up coming out with shit like that. And then what happens when Sega doesn't cut corners? What happens when Sega doesn't do crunch time? What happens when Sega doesn't overwork their workers and give them shitty wages? You get shit like Sonic Frontiers. While it got some negative reviews, Sonic Frontiers is looked at as a positive step in the right direction for the Sonic franchise. And I think that as workers, the employees deserve a raise just because they are putting their passion into their work. And I mean, I just think that workers are entitled to the fruits of their labor. But until capitalism is abolished, I think unionizing is the least we can do in terms of supporting the working class.
I'm Sonic the Hedgehog. I have no master, except the wind that blows free.